So there was a certain kind of comedy back then, which you might characterise as being a bit cruel, and there's been a reaction to that today. But there's now a reaction to the reaction, I was going to say. There's people like Ricky Gervais, there's Jimmy Carr coming back and saying, actually, I'm not going to be closed down. I'm going to make comedy which is offensive. Where do you stand on that?
Nobody's trying to close them down, and I don't think they're trying to make comedy that's offensive. I think they're trying to be funny. There is a fringe area where there has developed a certain feeling amongst some audiences that they have a right not to be offended. They certainly have a right not to feel threatened to be the exposed to hate speak. But there's a big difference between giving offence and provoking hatred. And on the whole, I think there's still a great deal of common sense in this room. I don't think that in the long run, the only winners about this cancellation debate are going to be those on the right who want to provoke a culture war. They want to use it to distract attention from the utter failure of their social policies and their economic policies. They'd rather we were all talking about whether someone's been cancelled or not, instead of whether kids are actually getting enough to eat in the schools. And I think it's largely a smokescreen. Having said that, of course, because the internet allows anyone's outrage to be multiplied, because 100 voices on Twitter make an enormous noise, I can assure you, having occasionally been subjected to it myself. And I think we do have to be careful about policing language to the extent where we say if somebody merely feels uncomfortable, we let them say they feel unsafe. There's a lot of difference between feeling uncomfortable and feeling unsafe, and I think we need to keep an eye on that. Having said that, on the whole, really the only winners out of this conversation we're having now, Andrew, are going to be Trump and frankly, Johnson and at the moment, the current government who wants to weaponise a culture war.
I'm glad you said there's a lot of common sense in the room, because we're sitting in this room, in the studio, and the person sitting in that chair not a few moments ago was Liz Truss.
Oh, my God. Really?
She was here being interviewed by Iain Dale. Yes. Yeah. Liz Truss, the letters. Just what do you make of this? It's a return of Liz Truss so soon after those memorable events.
Well, I think it's a very depressing example of the level of public debate, a level of politics that we've arrived at. I mean, I find it beyond depressing to a point of truly sad that we lightly take that we say, oh, we live in a post-truth age. People say that. You mean we're living in the Dark Ages? You mean we've returned to a medieval world where anyone can say anything, any prejudice, any myth, any conspiracy, any lie can be weaponized by those in power, and there's no way you can contradict it. If they say it's true, it is true. We have arrived very quickly at a point where all the advances of the Enlightenment, when the primacy of evidence, then the absolute necessity for any position to be backed up by argument, factual base, which gave us all the benefits of the Enlightenment in terms of philosophy and science, etc., have been thrown out. And obviously, Truss, I mean, idiotic person that she is, driven now. I mean, I thought slightly better of her, but she clearly seems to be as driven by anger and ego as the worst of them. She seeks power for power's sake. She clearly has no idea what she's talking about, and yet can give the impression of doing so, because we live in a world where yesterday's news might as well be medieval news, because the fact that she can now say, I didn't tank the economy.
And so the question then is, how do you improve the conversation? How do you get back a little bit towards the Enlightenment? Because I think we would both agree you don't do it by shutting people down.
No, you don't.
We had the example of what happened to that right-wing National Conservative group in Brussels only yesterday. They were shut down by the Brussels police.
Very foolish that the mayor, in an attempt to basically disallow what he considered to be, and I think pretty objectionable views from the far right, allowed them to pose as martyrs by refusing to let them talk. It was a silly thing to do. He gave Farage the megaphone he wanted, and
he kind of made his point for him, didn't he? In a way,
absolutely. Yeah. Farage able to say, "Oh, free speech is gone," and I think in a way it had. I think it was extremely wrong. They weren't provoking hate speak. They were just doing some very dull, boring right-wing politics, and that's their right, and they need to be allowed to do so. Andrew, the answer is not clear. We can all hope that the primacy of evidence, the fact that we can only hope that out of the blue, miraculously, a generation of politicians will emerge who will agree across the divide to not lie at each other, to not say black is white and white is black, to not deliberately and mendaciously divert attention from the real, to put up a smoke screen, a false argument. I mean, the fact that we knighted, that was his name, that Aussie bloke who came up with the dead cat theory. The Tories...
was it Lyndon Crosby? I think it probably was.
They gave him a knighthood, a man who literally boasted, my cleverest contribution to political debate was to invent a way of avoiding the difficult questions. If somebody asks you, why are you tanking the economy, put a dead cat on the table and they'll have to talk about that. And this man got knighted. Oh, he's a clever fellow. He really... I mean, the dead cat theory is one of the most depressing developments in political debate. We now allow it. Politicians,
and it's all around us every day, all
Constantly.
the time. But absolutely, I have to say to everybody listening, Ben Elton will be coming to your town. He's going to absolutely everywhere with his authentic stupidity tour coming very shortly to you. Ben, thank you very much indeed for joining LBC tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you, Andrew.